As the sound of hooves thundered from the far end of the imperial road, I was looking down at the mud spots on my cuffs. Miss Qin, the horses have arrived. Zheng Lu bowed low and stepped aside, the beads of sweat on his forehead glistening blindingly under the sun. There were 3 tribute horses in total, their coats sleek and glossy, their bridles engraved with silver blossoms. They were the offspring of the horses Zhao Yan had ridden during this year's spring hunt, specially brought in from the North Park to add flair to the palace banquet. I shifted half a step to the right. In my past life, at this very spot, I stood half a foot away from Jiang Xingzhou. When the horse charged out from the corner of the imperial way, the reins in Zheng Lu's hand slackened first by one length, then another. Jiang Xingzhou stepped forward, attempting to force down the head of the startled horse, only for its hooves to land squarely on his chest. I remembered that sound for 3 years. Cousin, your hairpin today is quite exquisite. Wei Tan peeked half her face out from behind Jiang Xingzhou, her voice neither high nor low, just enough to make the noblewomen in front turn their heads to look. Her fingers rested on Jiang Xingzhou's cuff, her knuckles turning slightly white. Brought back from Beiyuan? Jiang Xingzhou didn't look back, merely shifting his elbow slightly to give her a steadier grip. Yes, a reward from His Majesty during the last spring hunt. I stared at his cuff. That hand was still resting there, Wei Tan's fingernails digging into the gold-woven patterns of the sleeve edge, as if afraid of being pushed aside by someone. The horses had not yet arrived, but the stone slabs of the imperial road were already scorching from the sun, the heat rising through the soles of my shoes as if urging something along. Zheng Lu took another step back. I noticed he was clutching a frayed rope end in his left hand, while his right hand was empty. Leading a horse team requires at least 2 people holding the reins on either side, but the attendant on the right had been sent away at some point and was now crouching 10 paces off, tying his shoelaces. Ying, stand closer. Qin Chongjian's voice came from behind, carrying the detached, neutral tone honed 3 years in officialdom. Today, he wore a brand new ochre round collar robe. The fabric was thick, and his back collar was already damp with sweat from standing under the sun. A few colleagues from the Ministry of Personnel were exchanging pleasantries just a few steps away, and he had to maintain his dignity. I took a step forward, positioning myself exactly on the line between Jiang Xingzhou and the imperial path. Wei Tan withdrew his fingers. The sound of the horse rounding the corner of the palace wall came sooner than in my previous life. I had counted it before, from the moment the hooves hit the first loose paving stone to the moment I heard the sound of Jiang Xingzhou's ribs snapping, there were 4 breaths in between. Now, the moment I heard the first neigh, I began counting in my head. 1. Zheng Lu's grip on the rope loosened completely, and he fell backward, scrambling and crawling to hide by the side of the road. The young servant had just stood up when he was sent staggering by a swipe of the horse's tail. The spare reins flew from his hand, whipping across the ground like a snake. 2. The bay horse's front hooves were already reared high. Jiang Xingzhou took a step forward, raising his left hand in an attempt to grab the bridle. That half-foot he moved forward placed him directly beneath where the hooves were about to strike. Behind him, Wei Tan let out a sharp, stifled gasp before shrinking back behind Madame Wu. 3. I reached out. It wasn't a forward lunge. In my past life, I failed to catch him because that forward lunge caused me to trip first. My knees slammed into the stone slabs, and I could only watch from the ground as he was trampled. This time, I shifted half a step to his side, threaded my right hand under the crook of his elbow, gripped the jade belt hook at the small of his back, and threw my entire body weight downward. Jiang Xingzhou was yanked a full foot to the left by my pull. The horse's front left hoof came down, grazing his right shoulder. The horseshoe scraped across the gold thread embroidery, tearing a gash. He staggered 2 steps toward me, and taking advantage of his lost balance, I released the jade hook and rolled myself out into the mud. The edge of the stone slabs was covered in muddy water from this morning's cleaning, not yet dry. When my back slammed into it, a spray of turbid mud splashed up, pouring down my neck and into my collar, cold. 4. The horse's hoof landed on the very stone slab where I had been standing just moments before. Half of it shattered. Before the neighing had even subsided, a second horse charged out right behind the first. Its bridle was askew, and the silver bit swung wildly against its mouth, leaving a smear of blood. Zheng Lu huddled by the roadside, shouting, "Stop it! Stop it!" while the surrounding women were already screaming. I saw Lady Wu pulling Wei Tan back behind a gallery pillar, moving with surprising speed. Jiang Xingzhou braced himself against the ground, trying to stand. His right shoulder had been gashed by a horseshoe, a dark red stain spreading across his sleeve, yet his other hand reached out, his fingers gripping the jade bracelet on my wrist. "Get up!" His voice remained steady. When he pulled me up, my back was covered in mud, and my entire spine felt frozen stiff. He released my wrist, glanced toward the corridor pillar, and then turned back to me. "Are you all right?" I couldn't speak. It wasn't because of the pain, but because when he turned his head, he wasn't looking at my injuries. He was looking at the back of Wei Tan's head as she huddled in Lady Wu's arms. In my past life, as he lay in a pool of blood, he had stared in that same direction and uttered the exact same words, "Is my cousin safe?" At that moment, the sound of galloping hooves was whipped to a halt by a dozen lashes. The imperial guard swarmed in from the direction of the palace gates, and I heard someone shouting, "Hold the bridles! Hold the bridles!" Zheng Lu knelt by the roadside, kowtowing repeatedly, the blood on his forehead mixing with the mud in the crevices of the stone slabs. Jiang Xingzhou's hand slid down from my wrist. He turned around, the blood from his right shoulder already soaking through half his sleeve, yet he walked toward the corridor pillar first. "Cousin, were you frightened?" Wei Tan lifted her head from Madame Wu's embrace. Her face was clean, without a single tear shed, but her voice trembled like a taut string. "Cousin, your shoulder is covered in blood." Jiang Xingzhou looked down at his sleeve. "It's just a flesh wound." I stood rooted to the spot. Mud was sliding down my back along the curve of my waist, but my right hand remained clenched around my cuff. Through the fabric, my fingertips could feel the object I had scavenged from the ground when I fell. It was made of iron, about the thickness of a pinky finger, with one end as sharp as a hooked thorn and smeared with horsehair. It was the half-length spur that Wei Tan had retracted into his sleeve. At this moment in my previous life, I had been lying face down on the ground, hearing the sound of Jiang Xingzhou's bone snapping, seeing nothing. This time, I saw everything clearly. "Miss Qin." Zheng Lu scrambled up from the roadside, bowing to me with a face covered in blood, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form a sentence. Are you unhurt?" I loosened my cuff and pushed the spur further inside, ensuring it was securely hidden deep within my sleeve pocket. "Director Zheng." Yes. "The horse today, did you personally feed it the fodder?" Zheng Lu's knees began to tremble again. His lips quivered as he glanced at the reddish-brown horse still struggling against the ground not far away, then at Mrs. Wu and Wei Tan surrounding Jiang Xingzhou by the corridor pillars, before finally shrinking his gaze back to the puddle of mud at my feet. It was I who personally added the feed. "And the gate to the stable, did you lock that with your own hands as well?" He didn't answer. His eyes flickered, shifting half an inch to the right. In that direction stood the tasseled edge of the crimson silk scarf Wei Tan had draped over her shoulders today. I withdrew my gaze and looked down to smooth out my cuffs, letting the muddy water leak through my fingers. "That is well. When His Majesty asks later, simply answer truthfully, Manager Zheng." Zheng Lu's knees finally gave out. With a thud, he sank into the puddle of mud at my feet. While Zheng Lu remained kneeling in the mud, refusing to get up, Jiang Xingzhou had already walked back toward me. The wound on his right shoulder was being pressed down by Madame Wu with a handkerchief, but the crimson blood had soaked through 3 or 4 layers of cotton and was still seeping out. His face had grown paler, yet his steps remained steady. Once he came to a halt in front of me, he first swept his gaze over me from head to toe. I was covered in mud from my back to my hem, with several stray locks of hair plastered against the side of my neck. "Go to the side hall and change your clothes." His brow furrowed slightly as he spoke, his voice kept low as if afraid others might overhear. "I'll have someone send a clean set over." I didn't respond, my gaze falling on the handkerchief on his shoulder. Madame Wu's hand was pressed against the cloth, her knuckles turning white, the force so great it didn't look like she was stopping a bleed, but rather as if she were holding down something she feared might float to the surface. Hanzhou. Madame Wu's voice was strained tight. The imperial physician will be here any moment. Don't move around. Mother, I will escort Miss Qin over first. She has people to attend to her. Madame Wu didn't look at me, merely tilting her chin slightly towards someone behind her. Wei, take Miss Qin to the side hall to change her clothes. A maid came trotting over, holding a spare outer garment in her hands, and bowed to me with a face full of trepidation. I recognized her as part of the Jiang family's entourage. She had been by Madame Wu's side for 2 years. From my past life to this one, the way she looked at me had always been the same, a layer of polite distance beneath the surface of respect. Thank you for your trouble. I nodded to Wei, pulling my sleeve down slightly to hide the iron spike more securely. As I turned to leave, Jiang Xingzhou reached out as if to catch my wrist, but then withdrew his hand. Ying. He rarely called me that. Usually, it was a formal Miss Qin, but today, perhaps because he had seen blood, that layer of propriety had loosened somewhat. He paused, his lips twitching as if he wanted to ask something, but the imperial physician had already arrived behind him. Madame Wu was repeatedly urging everyone to make way, so he swallowed his words. Guided by Wei, I walked toward the side hall. After taking 3 steps, I heard Wei Tan's voice behind me. Cousin, let the imperial physician take a look first. I'll help support your arm. Her voice was still trembling, but it was the exact same tremor as when she had shrunk into Madame Wu's arms in front of the horse earlier, not a single note out of place. In my past life, after Jiang Xingzhou was carried back to the manor, Wei Tan knelt by his bedside for an entire night, saying, "Cousin, don't scare me," over 100 times. Every single time, the tail end of her voice rose to the exact same pitch. I pulled my thoughts back and stepped over the threshold of the side hall. The side hall was reserved for the wives of high-ranking officials to rest. It wasn't large, with a single screen separating the inner and outer areas. Wei placed the clean clothes on the long table outside the screen and withdrew, closing the door with a soft click. I was in no hurry to change. Once the sound of footsteps outside had faded, I pulled the broken spur from my sleeve and held it in my palm, examining it closely against the light filtering through the crack in the window. It was made of iron, about 3 inches long, with one end sharpened to a keen point. The tip was tangled with a small tuft of dark red hair, horsehair. At the base of the iron spur was a shallow groove, looking like a mark worn down by someone repeatedly rubbing it between their fingers. Along the edges of the groove were tiny specks of grayish-white powder. I brought it close to my nose and caught a very faint scent of herbs, bitter and astringent. I wrapped the spur back in my handkerchief, tucked it away, and quickly changed into the dry clothes. Just as she finished fastening her belt, Qin Chengjian's voice came from outside. Ying. When he pushed the door open and entered, his expression was grim, his lips pressed into a thin line. A few specks of mud were splattered across the front of his official robes. He had likely just finished dealing with the interrogations of his colleagues on the imperial way before rushing over. Are you hurt? No. That's good then. He paused, the hand clenched beneath his sleeve loosening slightly, as if he wanted to say something but suppressed it. His Majesty has already ordered Zheng Lu to be taken into custody and will be looking into the matter before the banquet begins. Having said his piece, he turned to leave, but stopped at the doorway without looking back. That move you made to pull Jiang Xingzhou back just now, it was far too risky. I didn't respond. He stood there for a moment, then pushed the door open and left. Standing behind the screen, I straightened my cuffs. Too risky, he was right. But if I hadn't made that move, Jiang Xingzhou would be lying in a coffin today. In his previous life, he was carried back, confined to bed for 4 months with 3 broken ribs on his right side and blood accumulated in his lungs. Zhao Yan bestowed a heap of medicinal herbs, Wu Shi kept watch by his bedside day and night, and Wei Tan fainted from crying twice. For months later, when he was finally able to walk, his right shoulder was left with a permanent ailment, rendering him unable to lift it whenever it rained. Later, he resigned from his post in the Imperial Guard and spent his days copying books in the study, with Wei Tan by his side grinding ink and serving tea. The documents for my broken engagement were sent over on the start of spring in the 3rd year. Qin Chongjian held on to them for 3 months, but in the end, he submitted them for me. After the Qin family broke off the engagement, Wei Tan's marriage into the family took place the following autumn. On the day Jiang Xingzhou went to receive his bride, he could not ride a horse and had to be carried in a sedan chair to fetch her. I smoothed the last fold of my cuff and pushed the door open. The mess on the Imperial Way had already been cleared. The shattered stone slabs were replaced with new ones, and the bloodstains had been washed away, leaving only a pool of pale pink water. The patch of mud where Zheng Lu had knelt was trampled into a chaotic mess, with a horseshoe print the size of half a palm embedded in the crevices of the stone slabs, not yet filled in. I bypassed the puddle and headed toward the banquet hall. As I passed through the moon gate, I ran head-on into 2 eunuchs dragging someone along the side corridor, one on each side. The man's head was tucked low, his official robes were covered in mud, and the fabric at his knees was worn through, revealing the bruised and purple flesh beneath. It was Zheng Lu. As he was dragged past me, he caught a glimpse of me out of the corner of his eye. His lips suddenly began to tremble violently, as if he wanted to cry out. But the eunuch on the left pressed down hard on his shoulder blade, and his voice was stifled in his throat, producing only a short, sharp gasp. I stood rooted to the spot, waiting until the 3 of them had rounded the corner of the corridor and disappeared from sight before I continued walking forward. A few officials stood on the steps at the entrance of the banquet hall, discussing the recent incident in hushed tones. I caught fragments of their conversation, words like tribute horses, North Park, and Zheng Lu likely won't be saved this time leaking out from among them. A court official in a green robe noticed me. He fell silent and gave me a polite, respectful bow. Miss Qin must have been quite startled. I nodded to him, my gaze sweeping past his side. The side door on the west of the banquet hall was half open, revealing a long table inside where several people who looked like imperial physicians were busy around a chair. Through the gap in the door, I could see a partial silhouette of Jiang Xingzhou. The clothing on his right shoulder had been cut away, wrapped in freshly changed white gauze. Wei Tan stood to his left, holding a bowl of tea in her hands. Wei Tan leaned her head toward Jiang Xingzhou, saying something to him with only the slightest movement of her lips. Upon hearing it, the corners of Jiang Xingzhou's mouth curved upward slightly as he lifted his left hand from the armrest to take the bowl of tea. I withdrew my gaze. When Director Zheng was being escorted away just now, he muttered something under his breath. I turned my head, my voice neither high nor low, just loud enough for the green-robed official to hear. He seemed to mention something about iron. The physician froze for a moment. Something made of iron? I'm not certain either. Perhaps I misheard. I gave him a slight smile, lifting the hem of my skirt as I stepped up the stairs to the banquet hall. When you report back to His Majesty later, please just mention that head official Zheng has something to say. The physician stood rooted to the spot, his gaze lingering on my face for a couple of breaths. I entered through the side door of the banquet hall and took a seat by a pillar. On the chair behind the screen, Wei Tan had just taken the teacup back from Jiang Xingzhou, her fingertips lightly brushing against the web of his thumb. Her profile was turned toward me, her lips curved in a smile, but her other hand hung at her side, her thumb repeatedly scraping the pad of her index finger. I had seen that movement before. On the night Jiang Xingzhou was carried back to the manor in my past life, while Wei Tan knelt by the couch weeping, her fingers had scraped in that exact same way, rubbing the pads of her fingers until they were flushed red, as if she were trying to scrub something off her skin. I picked up the teacup from the table and took a sip. The tea had already gone cold. The long, drawn-out announcement of an attendant echoed from outside the hall. His Majesty has arrived. After Zhao Yan took his seat, the banquet hall remained silent for a full 5 breaths. Today, he wore a set of black casual robes without his imperial crown. His hair was simply bound with a jade hairpin, looking as though he had just come straight from the royal study. His fingers rested on the armrest, his knuckles tapping rhythmically. The sound wasn't loud, yet it rang out with striking clarity amidst the absolute silence of the hall. Where is Zheng Lu? The chief eunuch serving before the throne bowed and stepped forward. Replying to your majesty, he is being held in the side corridor awaiting orders. Bring him in to answer. Zheng Lu was dragged inside. His legs seemed no longer able to support his weight. He scraped forward on his knees for some distance before barely managing to hold a kneeling position. The mud and blood on his forehead had dried into a crust, which crumbled and fell away the moment he lowered his head. Your Majesty. You were the one who fed the horse. Zhao Yan's fingers came to a halt. You were the one who locked the gate. Today, the horse bolted on the imperial path, shattering one of my stone tiles and grazing the shoulder of the eldest son of the Jiang family. Tell me, was the horse disobedient, or were you negligent? Zheng Lu's lips parted and closed, trembling 3 times before he could squeeze out a sound. Replying to your majesty. It was the horse. For some reason, the horse was exceptionally restless today. It was fine when I added the feed, and it was fine when I let it out, but when we reached the corner of the imperial path, it suddenly... Suddenly? Zhao Yan leaned forward slightly. I suddenly spoke up. Your Majesty. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough in the quiet banquet hall. Everyone's gaze shifted toward me. Zhao Yan narrowed his eyes. The girl from the Qin family? I rose from my seat, walked to the center of the hall, and stood still, first performing a formal bow. This humble daughter just had a fall on the imperial path, and happened to pick something up from the mud. I pulled the handkerchief from my sleeve, unfolded it, and held the iron barb in the palm of my hand. I would like to ask Manager Zheng, among the iron tools used by the stud farm for trimming hooves and removing shoes, are there any items with such hooked points? The entire hall fell silent. Zheng Lu stared at the iron barb in my palm, his eyes fixed as if nailed in place, and his whole body began to shake like a sieve. In response to the young lady. No, there are not. Then, does Manager Zheng recognize what this object is used for? Zheng Lu stopped answering. His chin trembled as if it were about to dislocate, and his lips turned a pale, sickly blue. He cast a desperate glance to the right, toward the table where the Jiang family women were seated. Madame Wu was sipping her tea, appearing as though she had heard nothing at all. Wei Tan sat beside her, head bowed, twisting the handkerchief in her hands. Zhao Yan reached out and took my hand, examining the iron barb under the candlelight. The tip is hooked with a barb, and there's horsehair caught in it. Zheng Lu. His voice suddenly turned cold. Tell me one more time, were you the only one who fed and locked up the horses today? Did anyone else touch them? Zheng Lu's forehead struck the ground, the impact making a dull thud against the bluestone floor. Replying to your majesty. It was just me serving alone. The people from the North Park only delivered the horse to the entrance of the equine department and left. The subsequent feeding, locking the gate, and leading it onto the imperial path were all done by my own hands. As he spoke, he buried his head even lower, as if trying to shrink himself into a crack in the ground. However, his left thumb kept picking at the palm of his right hand. Zhao Yan suddenly let out a short laugh. I have seen countless people report to me, those who lie, those with a guilty conscience, those afraid of death, each has their own tell. He tapped his temple. Your tell is called speaking of one person while thinking of another. Zheng Lu lay paralyzed there, motionless. Zhao Yan handed the iron spike back to the nearby attendant. Take this down and have everyone in the imperial stables identify it to see who has seen this object. Take statements from all the grooms on the imperial path. Find out who entered the stables and who touched the fences today, question them one by one. The attendant carried the iron spike and withdrew. Zhao Yan leaned back against his chair, his gaze falling upon the Jiang family's seating area, sweeping over them casually. Young Jiang, you sustained significant injuries today. Go back and rest first. Once I have investigated this matter thoroughly, I will inform you. Jiang Xingzhou rose to express his gratitude, but his right shoulder began to bleed again, a small patch of dark red seeping through the white gauze. He walked slowly. Wei Tan followed him from the banquet and reached out to support his arm. Jiang Xingzhou flinched slightly but did not pull away, and the two moved toward the side door, one behind the other. Madame Wu followed a few paces behind, carrying tea, her steps steady and unhurried. I returned to my seat. Qin Chongjian glanced at me from the adjacent table but said nothing. The banquet proceeded as usual. The dishes were served in an orderly fashion, and as the sound of silk and bamboo instruments rose, the bloody scent of the earlier horse stampede seemed to be washed away by the aroma of wine. Zhao Yan held his cup and joked with his ministers, making no further mention of Zheng Lu. But I noticed him having an attendant pass a note to a man in a green robe nearby, the very same physician I had been speaking with at the entrance of the banquet hall earlier. The man took the note, glanced at it, gave a slight nod, and rose to head toward the side corridor. Midway through the banquet, the music shifted to a new melody. Zhao Yan suddenly set down his cup, his voice neither loud nor soft. By the way, has the fodder Zheng Lu added today been inspected? The green-robed physician had returned at some point, standing bowed by a palace pillar. Hearing this, he stepped forward. Reporting to your majesty, I have been to the Directorate of Studs and inspected the leftover feed in the stables. And? The fodder was clean. However, I scraped some grayish-white powder from the crevices at the bottom of the manger. It smelled of herbs, so I took it to the Imperial Academy of Medicine for identification. Zhao Yin raised an eyebrow. Medicine? The official presented a small paper packet with both hands. The physicians at the academy said this powder is primarily composed of ephedra root, mixed with a small amount of ground aconite. If mixed into the fodder and fed to a horse, it shows no effect at first. But once the horse is led out of the stable and walks for a while, causing the blood to circulate faster, it will suddenly become violent and uncontrollably frantic. Throughout the hall, chopsticks came to a standstill. Zhao Yin did not take the paper packet. Instead, his gaze drifted past the palace pillars, landing on the empty seating area belonging to the Jiang family. Can outsiders enter the stables of the horse training department? The physician lowered his head. Zheng Lu, the manager of the horse training department, said that he left his post for about half an hour yesterday afternoon to collect his monthly salary. At that time, an unfamiliar maidservant arrived to deliver the Jiang family's gift return ledger. A maid from the Jiang family? She said she was acting on Lady Wu's orders to deliver a transcribed Buddhist sutra on behalf of the young lady cousin, to be offered at the Moshan shrine as a prayer for young Master Zhang's well-being. My fingers tightened slowly around the cup. Wei Tan's scarlet silk sash had never appeared on the imperial way from the very beginning. Yet, when Zheng Lu knelt in the mud, the glance he cast to the right was clearly directed at the tip of that very tassel. Zhao Yan's fingertips tapped lightly against the surface of the desk. Bring Zheng Lu back up. Also, have that young lady from the Jiang family come here as well. When Zheng Lu was brought up, his mouth was stuffed with a cloth, and a fresh gash had appeared on his forehead, likely from a bump in the side corridor. Pressed down by the attendants to kneel in the center of the hall, his eyes first darted toward the empty seats of the Jiang family. Finding no one there, he quickly withdrew his gaze. Zhao Yin twirled the small paper packet between his fingertips twice. Zheng Lu, I will ask you one more time. During that half hour yesterday afternoon when you were collecting your monthly allowance, who came to deliver something? Zheng Lu's cheeks trembled, and a series of muffled, guttural sounds escaped his throat. The attendant pulled the cloth from his mouth, and he lay prostrate on the ground, gasping for several breaths before he could squeeze out any words. Reporting to your majesty. Yesterday afternoon, a maidservant did indeed come to the equine department. She said she was from the Jiang family and was delivering a transcribed Buddhist sutra on behalf of the young lady to be offered at the horse god shrine. I was just about to head to the accounting office to collect some money at the time, so I let her go in and wait first. You left her alone in the stables? I came back from collecting the money and she was already gone. The sutra was placed on the offering table at the horse god shrine. I went to check afterward, and it was indeed a volume of scripture. I was muddled for a moment, thinking she was just placing a sutra and hadn't touched the fodder. Zhao Yan said nothing, turning his gaze toward the gallery pillar. The physician in the green robe immediately stepped forward. "Your Majesty, there are several fresh scratch marks on the inner latch of the stable gate, the width of which matches the base of that iron spike. Someone must have picked the lock to enter." Zhao Yan nodded slightly. "And the maidservant? Do you still remember her appearance?" Zheng Lu racked his brains to remember. His fence-sitting nature made him afraid to pin the blame on any one person, yet he feared that if he didn't implicate someone, he wouldn't be able to save himself. He could only stammer out 2 sentences repeatedly. I only remember she was wearing a blue-gray sleeveless jacket. She looked young and had a high-pitched, thin voice. I really can't remember anything else." Zhao Yan waved his hand in disappointment, but he did not press the matter further. Qin Chongjian sat opposite me, his chopsticks remaining untouched. I noticed him glancing at me every so often, his gaze shifting from my face to my hand, then away again. An attendant entered through the side door and whispered a few words into Zhao Yan's ear. After listening, Zhao Yan's eyebrows twitched slightly, but he quickly regained his impassive expression. Jiang Xingzhou has returned to his manor early with his injuries. His cousin, Lady Wu, has also taken her leave, saying she needs to return to look after him. Qin Chongjian suddenly spoke up. "Your Majesty, I believe this matter involves the duties of the horse training department. It has not yet been clarified how the powder was mixed into the fodder, and relying solely on Zheng Lu's confession may lead to oversights. It would be better to suspend the entire horse training department pending investigation, and then proceed with punishment once the facts are verified." Zhao Yan glanced at him and nodded. "Granted." By the time the banquet dispersed, the sky had already darkened. Qin Chongjian walked ahead, his pace about 20% faster than usual, his robe fluttering in the wind. I followed 2 or 3 steps behind him, passing through the moon gate and bypassing the new stone slabs on the imperial path. It wasn't until we reached the palace gate and boarded the carriage, the curtain dropping shut, that he finally spoke. "From the moment you started with those iron spikes today, every step you took was far too forward." "What does father mean by that?" "When speaking before His Majesty, for every word you say, others must follow suit. Zheng Lu's testimony was led by your questions, and it was you who provided the opening for the physician to inspect the fodder." I didn't respond. The carriage wheels rolled over the stone slabs, turning onto the road back to the manor with a heavy thud. "Jiang Xingzhou's injury isn't serious," Qin Chongjian's voice sounded muffled inside the carriage. "You were right to save him, but the matters that followed were not for you to speak of." "Then who should have spoken?" He remained silent for a long while. The light from the street lamps outside the carriage flickered across his face in alternating shadows. He leaned against the carriage wall and closed his eyes, looking weary. "You are an unmarried young lady, yet you interrogated the head of the equine management office before the emperor, handed over iron spurs, and steered the conversation. Have you considered how others will perceive you once word gets out?" "It doesn't matter how others perceive me." I reached out to pull the carriage curtain open just a crack, letting the cool wind pour in. "What matters is that the powder was scraped from beneath the horse trough, and a maid from the Jiang family just happened to visit the equine management office yesterday afternoon." Qin Chongjian opened his eyes and stared at the back of my head for several breaths, saying nothing more. After arriving home, he went straight to the study and had the butler deliver a message to me. I was to be grounded for 3 days. The reason given was inappropriate conduct at the palace banquet. Return home for self-reflection and transcribe the commandments for women 3 times. I didn't argue, but simply carried my lamp back to my own courtyard. As my maid, Chuinji, was making my bed, she whispered a complaint. "You clearly saved someone, miss. How is it that you're the one being punished now that we're back?" I told her to drop the subject. The lamp wick flickered. By the time I finished transcribing the commandments for women 3 times, it was already the following afternoon. Chuanji came in from outside carrying tea, a look of hesitation on her face. "Miss, the Jiang family sent someone over early this morning. They said young Master Zhang's wound has been causing recurring fevers. The imperial physician has seen him and advised complete bed rest." "Yes?" Also, Chuanji lowered her voice. "On my way to the front courtyard to return those books for you just now, I ran into the servant who came from the Jiang family to deliver thank you gifts. That servant was a bit of a gossip. He said young Master Zhang's wound was so painful in the middle of the night that he couldn't sleep, and the young female cousin stayed by his bedside all night long, only being persuaded to go back and rest at dawn." I set down my brush. "Wasn't young Master Zhang's wound treated with medicine yesterday? Why did it start hurting again in the middle of the night?" "They say the medicine was changed. The Imperial Academy of Medicine sent another bottle over last night, different from the one used for the dressing at the palace banquet. Madame Wu was the one who applied the new one." My fingertips paused for a moment. "The new medicine, who took it over?" "The young miss went to receive it herself." I put down my brush and stood up, walking to the bookshelf to pretend to browse. My fingers slid across a row of spines, coming to a stop on a thin ledger in the middle. "Chuanji, when you went to the Jiang residence to return those books for me last time, what kind of incense was burning in young Master Zhang's study?" Chuanji thought for a moment. "It was that agarwood, wasn't it? It had a somewhat sweet and cloying scent. I remember it being quite expensive, burned in whole pieces. Young Master Jiang used to light it whenever he was reading." "Are you sure it was agarwood?" I asked, my voice softening. "Not something else?" "I'm certain. The fragrance was just like the one the master burns during the New Year, sweet, but with a little. I can't quite describe it. It was as if a tiny bit of bitterness was mixed in. Just a hint. I thought I had missmelled it at the time." Bitterness. I closed the ledger. At yesterday's palace banquet, the old nanny by the Empress Dowager's side had privately passed a message to Lady Wu, saying that Jiang Xingzhou's wound medicine must be changed with great care, using the finest ingredients, yet ensuring he wasn't overnourished. At the time, Lady Wu had held the old nanny's hand, offering her thanks repeatedly. There was a faint hint of bitterness mixed into the agarwood incense. The new medicine had been personally collected by Wei Tan and applied by Lady Wu's own hands. "Chuanji, go to the Jiang residence once more. Say that I have finished copying the commandments for women and need to borrow a copy of biographies of exemplary women to cross-reference the text. When you go to the study to get the book, keep an eye out to see if that incense is still there." "Yes." I stood by the window, waiting for her return. The osmanthus tree in the courtyard was in full bloom, its fragrance so thick it felt almost stifling. In my past life, I would have been busy tailoring winter clothes at this time of year. I remember altering the black cloak I made for Jiang Xingzhou over and over again, ripping out the embroidery on the lapels 3 or 4 times before finally settling on a cluster of slender bamboo. He said he didn't like bamboo, claiming it looked too cold and lonely. Later, I tucked that cloak away at the bottom of a chest. It was never given to him. It was already dusk by the time Chuanji returned. She pushed the door open, placed the biographies of exemplary women on the table, and then took a few steps closer. "Miss, I went to the study specifically to fetch the books. I asked young Master Zhang's page to help find them while I waited at the door." "And the incense?" "It's been changed. It's no longer agarwood. The cloying sweetness is much fainter now, replaced by a cool, medicinal fragrance. When I asked why it was changed, the page said it was the young lady cousin's idea. She said the agarwood was too strong and caused dizziness after a while, so she had it switched to bamboo joint incense." "How much of the previous agarwood is left?" "The page said they've already been put away. Once the new seasonal incense arrived, they were moved into the storehouse." I didn't dare ask further for fear of alerting them, so I came straight back. Moved into the storehouse, I repeated softly. That's just as well. Chuinji didn't understand, only asking tentatively, then tomorrow, should I? No need to go back. I pulled something from my sleeve. It was the grayish-white powder that had been shaken off that iron spike. The paper wrapping was already somewhat worn. I had been keeping it close to my body all this time. Chuinji, go to the front courtyard and fetch a brazier for me. She froze for a moment, then turned and left. Standing by the window, I placed the paper packet next to the candlestick, my fingertip pressing lightly against the corner of the paper. Jiang Xingzhou's fever occurred after his medicine was changed, and Wei Tan had replaced his incense overnight. Changing the medicine and the incense both seemed perfectly reasonable. Had I not lived through it all in my past life, I would never have been able to connect these details. But the incense burner placed in the storehouse had been used. Burned ashes are different from new incense pellets. While new ones can be replaced, whatever was mixed into the old ashes would be revealed the moment they were tested. Chuinji returned with the brazier and set it down in the courtyard. I hesitated for a moment, but in the end, I did not burn that packet of powder. The firelight reflected onto the window paper, making the cover of the biographies of exemplary women flicker between light and shadow. Miss, are we not burning it anymore? Keep it. I tucked the paper packet back into my sleeve. I would keep it until the day the Jiang family held their banquet of apology. The apology banquet was held in the main hall of the Jiang residence. Zhao Yan did not attend, but he sent an inner attendant with half a basket of tribute pears, saying they were to replenish Jiang Xingzhou's qi. Over a dozen people were seated in the hall, officials' families from both sides, several physicians close to the Jiang family, and Qin Chongjian, who sat in the seat of honor. I sat just below him. Jiang Xingzhou wore a smoke-gray straight-collared robe. The wound on his right shoulder was wrapped in fresh gauze. The fabric was pulled smooth, making it difficult to tell how much swelling remained beneath. His complexion was better than it had been a few days ago, and though his lips were still somewhat pale, his spirits seemed fair. After taking his seat, he first raised his cup in a formal gesture of respect toward Qin Chongjian. Uncle Qin, Hanzhou is injured in the shoulder and cannot perform the full rites. Please forgive me. No need for such formalities. Qin Chongjian raised his cup in return, set it down, and said nothing more. The banquet was laid out formally. Cold appetizers and hot dishes were served in succession. Madame Wu sat beside Jiang Hanzhou, personally serving him, placing 2 helpings of fish onto his plate. Wei Tan sat on Madame Wu's other side, wearing a moon-white jacket today with only a single silver hairpin in her hair, looking so plain as if she were afraid of drawing attention. Jiang Hanzhou ate a few bites before setting down his chopsticks. His gaze slid from Qin Chongjian's face to mine, lingered for a brief moment, and then moved away. Mrs. Wu cleared her throat and looked at Qin Chongjian with a smile. Lord Qin, I invited you and Ningying here today, firstly to thank Ningying for risking her life to save Hanzhou that day, and secondly to apologize on behalf of a girl in our household. Regarding the incident at the stables, I heard about it afterward. It turns out a course maid from the manor was ignorant. While delivering scriptures to the horse training department, she accidentally bumped into a manger, leading to all that chaos. I am truly ashamed. She spoke gently, the smile lines on her face perfectly composed, as if the maid had merely spilled a bowl of soup. Qin Chongjian held his cup and did not respond. Wei Tan rose, picked up a cup of tea, and walked over to me with lowered eyes and a submissive expression, offering it with both hands. Cousin, it was my negligence that day. I should not have allowed that course maid to go to the horse training department alone to deliver the scriptures. The manor has already dealt with her, and I hope you will not take it to heart. Her voice was so soft it felt as though it could melt into water. The tips of her fingers, supporting the base of the cup as she handed it over, were tinged with a faint paleness. When I reached out to take the tea, my fingertips happened to brush against her wrist. Her skin was as cold as frost on a window pane in winter. You are too kind, Miss Wei. I took the tea but did not drink it, setting it down on the table instead. Since today is a banquet of apology, I happen to have something I would like young Master Jiang and Madame Wu to look over. I drew the handkerchief from my sleeve and spread it out upon the table. The iron spur lay on the handkerchief, casting a dull, dark glint under the candlelight. The horsehair on the hooked tip had already dried and crusted, curling into a small tuft of dark red bristles. Madame Wu's smile froze for an instant. Wei Tan stood before me with his eyes lowered, unmoving. Jiang Xingzhou glanced at the iron spur, then looked back at me. "Ying, what is this?" I picked it up from the mud on the imperial road that day. I extended my index finger and tapped the groove at the base of the spur. I had someone test the powder stuck to this. It is identical to the substance scraped from the bottom of the stables at the Directorate of Horse Training. Ephedra root mixed with aconite, when added to fodder, it causes an outbreak after the horse has traveled a certain distance. Someone held this iron spur to pick the lock of the stable, went inside to lace the feed, and left with the residue of the powder still lingering in their palm. The table fell silent. Madame Wu's hand holding the cup did not shake, but the curve of her lips tightened slightly. Wei Tan stood there with downcast eyes, the hem of her moon-white jacket swaying gently in the breeze, her expression unreadable. "Mother." Jiang Xingzhou looked toward Madame Wu. "When that maid went to the equine training department that day, did she ever touch the horse troughs?" Madame Wu set down her cup. The smile on her face did not fade, but her voice dropped half a tone. "The maids in this manor are all well behaved. Going to the equine training department to deliver scriptures was merely a formality. Why would she touch the troughs? It is likely that the people at the equine training department have sticky fingers and are trying to shift the blame onto our household." I nodded. Madame Wu is right. That is why I brought one more thing today. Chuanji entered from the hall, holding a small celadone incense burner in her hands. The burner was small, with a faint trace of ash still clinging to its side. She walked to the center of the hall, placed the burner on the side table, and stepped back. "This is the incense burner used in Master Zhang's study a few days ago." I looked toward Jiang Xingzhou. After Master Jiang was injured that day, the incense was replaced overnight. The old incense was put into storage, but there wasn't enough time to clean the old burner. Jiang Xingzhou's brow furrowed slightly. "Ying, are you investigating the items in my study?" "I am investigating how many pounds of ephedra root someone scattered into the troughs at the horse training department." My voice remained flat. "Master Jiang, you might want to take a look at the ashes at the bottom of this burner." Jiang Xingzhou fell silent for a moment. He reached out to take the incense burner, flipped open the lid, and examined the residual ash at the bottom by the candlelight. It was grayish-white and as fine as dust, identical to the powder found in the grooves of the iron spikes. His fingers paused. He looked up at Madame Wu, then at Wei Tan. Wei Tan never raised her eyes, standing by the table like an orchid planted in a pot, quiet and breathless. "Who changed this incense?" Jiang Xingzhou's voice was kept very low. The smile on Madame Wu's face finally faltered. "The powder in this incense. Is it the same as the one from the horse training department?" "I have already had the imperial physician examine it," I interjected. Before the incense burner was brought here, a pinch of the ashes from the bottom had already been sent to the Imperial Academy of Medicine for inspection. They said that the substance mixed into the agarwood is the same drug found in the horse mangers. However, once burned in the furnace, most of the medicinal properties evaporate and mix with the oily residue of the agarwood, making it difficult to distinguish through a cursory inspection, which is why it went unnoticed before. I paused for a moment. Young Master Jiang has been suffering from recurring fevers due to his old injuries these past few days. I fear there is still some medicinal vapor lingering in this incense. While not life-threatening, it conflicts with his wound medicine. If this continues, the stasis will not clear, and the wound will take much longer to heal. Jiang Xingzhou set the incense burner down with a very gentle motion. but his left hand pressed against the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white, as if it took a fair amount of strength to keep the burner from slipping away. Who changed the incense? When he asked for the second time, he didn't look at anyone, his gaze fixed on the plate of cold fish on the table. Wei Tan finally looked up. Her lips moved, trembling at first, and then her entire face began to quiver. Tears rolled out of her eyes, silent and breathless, dripping along her jawline onto her moon-white lapel, soaking into a small, dark patch. Cousin. The incense was changed by the manor's steward. I just thought the agarwood was too strong and feared it would make you dizzy, so I casually suggested switching to something lighter. I don't know anything else. Her voice was as fragmented as scraps of paper scattered by the wind. Jiang Xingzhou did not look at her. He stared at the plate of fish for a good while longer, then slowly turned his head to look at me. Ying, what do you want? I stood up. My movements were steady as I unfastened the jasper engagement bracelet from my wrist. The bracelet's inner diameter was slightly small. When I first put it on, he had spent a long time rubbing soap on my hand just to slide it in. Now, taking it off took only 2 breaths. I placed the bracelet on the tabletop, setting it down beside that plate of stone-cold fish. Young Master Jiang, what I want is for you to call off this marriage. The hall fell silent, as if frozen solid by something. Qin Chongjian's hand, holding his cup, remained suspended in midair. Madame Wu's lips parted and then closed again. Wei Tan's tears were still streaming down, but her sobbing ceased for a fleeting moment, and in that moment, the corners of her mouth were flat. Jiang Xingzhou's face turned utterly pale. It wasn't the paleness of excessive blood loss, but something else, like the layer of turbidity stirred up from the bottom after a stone is hurled into the water. He stared at the bracelet on the table for a long time, then lifted his eyes to look at me. You want to break off the engagement? Yes. Because I didn't investigate the incense? Because the moment you saw the incense burner just now, the first thing you asked was who changed the incense? And the second was you searched my study. I lowered my eyes, my fingertip brushing against my bare wrist. From beginning to end, you never once asked Wei Tan, did you go to the horse training department? His Adam's apple bobbed. He lifted his left hand from the edge of the table and reached toward the bracelet, but his fingertips stopped just before they could touch it. Ying. This was the second time he had called my name in front of a room full of people. The first time was on the Imperial Road, when he asked me, "Are you all right?" The second time was now. He stared at the bracelet for a long while before speaking, his voice so low it seemed squeezed from the depths of his chest. It is true that this marriage was arranged by my parents, but you never thought of breaking the engagement, I interrupted him. I know. It is I who wish to withdraw. Young Master Jiang, please recover well. In the future, do not go changing Miss Wei's incense so carelessly. You will need your shoulders for many years to come. I turned around and walked out of the hall. Chuanji followed close behind. As I stepped over the threshold, the sound of a porcelain bowl clattering against the tabletop echoed from behind. Someone must have lost their grip on their cup. Then came Jiang Xingzhou's voice, slightly louder than before, as if he had stood up. Qin. I didn't look back. As I stepped out of the Jiang family gates, the night wind rushed into my collar. Chuanji caught up and draped a cloak over my shoulders. Miss, the bracelet. Are we just leaving it there? Leave it. I boarded the carriage. As the curtain fell, my fingertips brushed against my bare wrist. The mark left by the bracelet I had worn for 3 years was still there, faintly white, like the imprint of a crescent moon. The wheels rolled over the stone slabs with a sudden thud. In my past life, this bracelet wasn't taken off until the first day of spring in the 3rd year. In this life, it was more than 2 years early. I pulled my hands back into my sleeves and closed my eyes. The night wind poured in through the gaps in the carriage curtains, blowing away the last lingering scent of agarwood from my cuffs. The story ends here. Thank you all for your company, and see you in the next one.